There are countless movies where a paranormal force turns out to be someone hiding in the home. It could be a demon, a crazed boy, or any other play on the trope as long as there are enough jump scares. However, in 1987, a true crime story played out that made all of this a reality. The murderer here is scary enough for any horror movie, and the twists and turns are shocking. In today's video, we'll follow the tale from start to end and see why this was so hard to solve. In the late 1980s, a teenage girl called Annie Andrews lived a fairly normal life with her sister Jessica and her father Brian. Her father was a widower and subsequently out of the house a lot to work extra shifts to make ends meet, leaving the two girls alone at home unsupervised. So far, this story is normal enough, but Annie would soon meet a boy that would terrorize her life. It all began with a simple phone call. One day the phone rang, and Annie discovered a boy at the other end who introduced himself as Daniel. The pair instantly connected, with Daniel saying all the right things to enthrall a teenage girl without giving himself away. He insisted he was from another school, and they had a mutual friend. Today, that line would be a red flag. There are often jokes about the "my girlfriend goes to another school" energy of teenagers trying too hard to fit in. But here, it worked like a charm, and the pair spoke every day. Annie was keen to meet this tall, blonde, and handsome stranger at the other end of the line, and so they did. First impressions weren't great. Daniel wasn't the heartthrob he'd made himself out to be at all. But Annie gave him a chance based on their connection over the phone. Second impressions were even worse. He seemed like a different guy and upset Annie when he asked about her mother's death. She called off the date and the relationship then and there. That should have been all there was to this story. Teenage boy oversells himself, fails to impress, gets rejected, and moves on. However, we wouldn't be covering this story today if there wasn't a bigger twist to the tale. We specialize in the weird tales of true crime and twisted murderer personalities. Hopefully, you're a subscriber already, so you know the sort of vibe we're talking about. If not, don't forget to sign up and hit that notification button for alerts to our new content. There are disturbing layers to this story, and it all continued a week later with a really spooky night in. Not long after the awkward conversation with Daniel about her mother's death, Annie began discussing it with her sister. This led to a fairly harmless decision to use a Ouija board to try and reconnect with her. This isn't that strange for teenagers going through this sort of grief. What was strange, however, was the response. The pair began to hear tapping sounds and feared it was a message from beyond the grave. To make matters worse, the tapping persisted long after the Ouija board was back in its box. It drove them mad, especially when it conveniently stopped whenever their father was at home. Their father was sympathetic and saw it as a desire to be close with their mother, and nothing more. Then the paranormal activity began. Furniture began to change positions. Things went missing, and there was no obvious explanation. It all culminated in a blood-tinged message on the wall that read, "I'm in your room. Come and find me." Wisely, they left the house, ran to a neighbor, and called their father. Unfortunately, their father believed it to be nothing but an attention-seeking stunt and a sign of their failing mental health. They went into counseling in the hope that this would solve the problem once and for all. Of course, it did nothing of the sort. The tapping continued, and so did the messages. Eventually, their father came home to find the house a complete mess and a different sort of message on the wall. All it said was, "Marry me." There was no longer any sort of pretense that this was a message from their dead mother. This was someone else trying to get at Annie in the most sadistically torturous way possible. It was Daniel. On the night that Brian Andrews found the new message and realized his kids were telling the truth all along, Daniel finally revealed himself. The problem was, this wasn't some messed up teen laughing that he'd been caught red-handed with a bottle of ketchup. Instead, he just stood in the corner of the room, saying nothing. He was wearing a white dress, Annie's mother's wedding dress, and holding a hat. Brian managed to take the hatchet and protect his daughters, chasing Daniel in the process. But then Daniel suddenly disappeared. There was no sign of him leaving the home or heading through the neighborhood. And you would expect the neighbors to pick up on a deranged teenager in a wedding dress. So, where did he go? Remarkably, he was still in the house and had been the entire time. When the police came to search the crime scene and solve the case, they noticed there were holes in the walls and the potential for small crawl spaces. One of those was right behind the dresser in Annie's room, and that's where they found Daniel. It turned out that he had been hiding out in there for 2 months straight, ever since Annie rejected him. Daniel hadn't been able to let her go after all those phone conversations. He was obsessed to a dangerous level, and it all culminated with the disturbing proposal in the dead mother's dress. He had made those noises all through the house by traveling through the passageways. He had taken the food and moved the furniture to scare them for 2 months. It's unclear how far he would have gone and how long he would have continued the charade. There is one final twist to the Annie Andrews story that makes this even more horrifying and explains a missing piece of the puzzle. We started this with Daniel calling Annie with that fake persona, but we never said why he called her. What started that fascination with Annie over other girls in town? Well, it turns out that Daniel had broken into the family home, seen a picture of Annie, and decided he wanted to get to know her better. This was a common trait with Daniel, who used burglaries as an outlet when dealing with mental health and learning difficulties. He liked the idea of being powerful enough to make people paranoid. Medics diagnosed Daniel with hyperactive disorder and had suffered countless experiences of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse as a child. We can't use this to excuse what he did to Annie, but it goes some way to explaining his mental state. There was no support for him in the 1980s, and he continued with his break-ins and cries for help. Sadly, this lack of support led to a second horrific tale in his saga. Most villain-in-the-wall movies have some sort of sequel or spin-off due to the popularity of the first. They don't always meet expectations and fall flat compared to the original. However, the sequel in the Daniel LaPlante story is the complete opposite. The Gustafson murder story was sad and arguably preventable given Daniel's past and relationship with the authorities. He could have been in care and rehabilitation. Instead, he took his actions further, with fatal consequences. He stole a handgun and went to his neighbor's home, where he assaulted and shot the pregnant Mrs. Gustafson before drowning her children in the bathtub. The police immediately suspected Daniel and found evidence at his home, including the murder weapon and some stolen items. He had fled to the woods and even tried to get someone to drive him away, but he was soon caught. Despite his age, the court tried him as an adult and sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences for the 3 deaths. He'll be eligible for parole in 2032. This is a big question that we can't overlook when talking about this true crime investigation. Would Daniel have gone on to be a murderer if the authorities and medics had provided the very best care possible? Or do you think he was destined to continue with this life of crime, even if the Andrews family had been able to solve this sooner? As always, we love to read your thoughts on the story and how you feel this matches up to the boy in the wall stories of the movies. Thank you for watching. Please give us a like and share this with other fans of these stories. We'll see you next time.